When the people shall have nothing more to eat, they'll eat the rich. The quote by French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau that summed up the spirit of the French Revolution is now trending online, with many demanding social justice be achieved through whatever means necessary. But what does eat the rich actually mean? I'm Annalise Borges, and this is The Stream.
Elon Musk's net worth just surpassed $400 billion, which is a historical high for the world's wealthiest man. If you're making $80,000 a year, it would take you 5 million years to make $400 billion.
If we're taking the temperature of the world right now, I'd say we're about 2 ticks away from off with their heads territory.
If you look at how much money these billionaires made, they don't need this much money.
Hey, this is a reminder that not all billionaires are the same. Some of them, like Elon Musk and Donald Trump, are going to be higher in fat content, and some of them, like Zuckerberg and Bezos, are going to be leaner and more gamey.
I'm too own a thing, not land. Oh, the words I sing praise the man. I'll starve to death cleaning your swimming pool and die of thirst in the pouring rain.
While the rich get richer, millions are struggling to get by. The World Bank says that, in fact, the wealth of the world's billionaires grew by $2 trillion last year. Meanwhile, about 700 million people, almost 10% of the global population, live in extreme poverty. That's with under $2.15 a day. Even in wealthy countries like the US, many regular people are being forced to make impossible choices, like either paying for medicine or buying groceries. Is the growing divide between the ultra-rich and the average citizen the driving force behind this call for change? Joining me to discuss this are John Pabon, a sustainability author, UN advisor, and content creator in Melbourne; Albina Alieva, a self-professed child of privilege and the founder of the Privileged Few channel. She's joining us from Boston; Darren Kampfer, an entrepreneur and socioeconomic and political content creator in Cape Town; and Madison Hill, a content creator in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Thank you all so much for your time today. Thank you for being part of the stream. Albina, on what you do and why, we wanted to introduce your online persona first, for those who may not know you. Take a look.
It's time for a rich kid confession. I'm 26 years old and daddy still pays most of my bills. When people find out that I can call my dad and ask him for a new car, money, or a much-needed vacation, they are trying to shame me. But the thing is, I've never been ashamed of being a rich kid.
Off social media, you come across as a bit more reasonable than that, I must say. Can you tell us about your notion of privilege and some of the things you share online, like Rich Dad Advice? What made you decide to create this type of content?
That was quite an entrance. You guys chose probably my favorite video, so thank you for that. The big problem which we're witnessing today is inequality. And what I've been noticing is that before, people from different financial backgrounds, they would live on the same streets or even send their children to the same schools. But now there is more and more segregation. And the problem is that money is held by the privileged few, but there is also gatekeeping of knowledge. So I decided that I want to make Rich Dad Advice accessible for all. And one of those examples is, for example, a trust fund. So mainstream media makes it seem like trust funds are only for ultra wealthy. But in reality, it's a great tool to start building your generational wealth. So we want to make those knowledges more accessible for all, because we strongly believe that the more people succeed, the better it is for all of us.
And yeah, that's definitely something particular about you. Even the fact that you actually know you're privileged makes you different from other rich kids, I would say. But we're gonna talk more about that. John, you actually have a series on TikTok about the title of today's show, actually, Eat the Rich. And I want to ask you about who exactly you mean by the rich. Here's one online user with one disclaimer that I want to see if you agree with. Take a look.
When you're talking about eat the rich, who exactly do you mean? I'll go first. When I talk about eat the rich, I am not talking about you. I'm not talking about me. I'm not talking about your pediatrician. I'm not talking about most attorneys or even most celebrities. I'm not talking about people who make $500,000, $1 million, maybe even $2 million a year. The people who I'm talking about are the people who have at least 9 figures in assets. These are people where it doesn't make sense for them to bend down and pick up a $100 bill off the floor because it's just not worth their time. This is the 1% of the 1%. As far as I'm concerned, the rest of us are in the same boat. We are all closer to each other than we are to them.
John, do you agree? Is that a fair statement?
No, absolutely a fair statement. Thanks for having me, by the way, as well. And I think when we think of what the ultra wealthy are, if we think of, say, the top 10%, we hear that a lot. The top 10% around the world, if you just take global averages, equates to a net worth of about 135,000 US dollars. So that may not be everybody watching and listening to this, but it probably would shock a few people to know that that's sort of where the bar is. But for me, just like what that other commenter said in the video, it's really the people that are sort of on the Who Run or the Forbes rich list. So the top 2,500 net wealth holders in the entire world. But even within that, I look at it through a smaller lens of those that have a big discrepancy between the things they say they're doing versus the things that they're actually doing with the wealth that they have. So it's a little bit of a narrower focus than just all the ultra wealthy, although we could certainly talk about every single one of those 2,700 people and certainly pick them apart.
And obviously, you mentioned Forbes, and the Forbes list, it doesn't include everyone. It doesn't include, I don't know, political wealth and dictators, etc. So we are talking about some people, but there's still so much more wealth out there. And I think that is, I guess, where the anger comes from and these calls to eat the rich. Darren, now that we've established roughly who we're talking about, what about this other saying that we come across a lot online, where there's no such a thing as an ethical billionaire? Truth or myth?
It's definitely the truth, because I suppose if you were to, by some miracle of nature, manage to accrue $1 billion in wealth in a planet or even a country that's as unequal as the one that I live in, withholding those kind of resources or that access to resource is definitely an unethical way to exist. You would have the wealth to significantly change people's access to healthcare, access to food, access to water, access to clothing, education, housing, and to just hold on to that access to resources because you feel that you've earned it is in itself unethical, irrespective of how you might have accrued that wealth.
Yeah, even if you did acquire that wealth in a fair way, which in today's system, it's quite exceptional. Madison, the issue here really seems to be inequality, right? More than anything, I think that's the key idea. The problem is not that money is abundant, but the concentration of it in very few hands. Would you say that that is the key of the concept behind this trend?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that there is definitely a growing awareness of the fact that we have in existence a lot more resources than most people have access to in their day-to-day life. And I think that the internet has really been a big part of kind of showing people different perspectives and kind of starting to raise awareness around that.
The massive wealth and power gap has been indeed more evident than ever in recent years, and social media users have a lot to do with that, but they have also been confused at times about some of the notions around this concept, like, for example, late-stage capitalism. Here's Jassim with a breakdown of some very important ideas. Take a look.
Having your bathroom breaks timed, told off just for leaning. Every aspect of your day monitored for efficiency, being treated worse than warehouse robots. This is how an Amazon worker described his working conditions in a piece for The Guardian newspaper. According to many users online, this is a perfect example of a late-stage capitalism. The term was popularized by Belgian Marxist economist Ernest Mandel. He divided the development of capitalism into 3 stages. First was a period of freely competitive capitalism. People with the money and means were free to compete in producing goods. This period led to the growth of industrial capital within countries. Second came monopoly capitalism. Having created monopolies within their countries, producers turned their focus outward. They pushed for imperialism and colonialism, opening new markets to exploit. The third and final stage is late capitalism, or late-stage capitalism. This stage emerged out of World War II and has several defining features. Markets and labor are globalized, with the same multinational companies buying and selling resources in countries around the world. So are we living late-stage capitalism now, or will our world become even more capitalistic in the future?
John, I guess I want to put that question to you. Where are we in these concepts, and do you think people are aware of them?
I don't think people are as aware as we may hope they are. So if we look at, for example, consumer packaged goods, so the things that we buy at the grocery store, of all the things that are in there, about 90% of them are controlled by just 10 parent conglomerate companies. That is a massive amount of control in the hands of just a few people. And at the top of those companies are, again, ultra-wealthy folks that sit on the Forbes rich list. You have the folks like the Mars family, who are a very secretive, ultra-wealthy family. I think they sit at number 35 on the Forbes rich list, but they own Mars Confectionery, one of the biggest confectionery companies in the world. And this goes on and on. So again, this idea of control of things and the late stage capital control by the hands of just a few people is a massive concern that a lot more people should be aware of.
And we're going to talk towards the end of the show about where this trend could go and if it could drive actual change. But before that, Albina, in one of your videos on the Privileged Few Productions channel, you say, and I'm quoting you, "Capitalism is a failed system that is failing so many of us." Coming from a rich kid like yourself, that is surprising. Can you tell us what you meant by that?
Yeah, just because I benefit from it, it doesn't mean that I don't understand that the system is only benefiting the privileged few. And I think this is exactly what is the biggest problem today, that people who already have so much money, they're the ones who are getting those high-paying jobs. For example, I was working in IT for 5 years, and what I realized there is that people who get to work in those fancy companies are people who graduated from fancy universities, who are paying for them. And in the end of the day, you only can get a high-paying job if you are able to pay for this university. And the problem in IT companies today is not even that there's not enough women. There are not enough people who are not rich kids. And I think that's why the system is failing so many of us.
And obviously, you come from a background of having lost some of your privilege as well. Do you want to share that briefly with us in terms of what happened to you growing up in Ukraine?
Yes, so I'm from Ukraine and I'm from the east of Ukraine. I was originally born and raised in Luhansk. So this is the city right at the border with Russia. And my dad, he had different types of businesses. So he thought that he's diversifying and that's why he's protecting us, but we never expected a war, right? So in 2014, when the war has started, half of his business was bombed, the other half just stopped operating. And that was the time, for the first time in my life, I was 16. I realized how privileged I used to be. And that's the thing about privilege. You only start noticing it when you don't have it. I think similar things apply to happiness. You only understand how happy you were once you're unhappy. But it made me really more grounded. It made me understand how privileged I used to be. And luckily, because my dad is a self-made businessman, he was able to build it back. But that was a very eye-opening experience. Prior to that, I actually thought that I would never get a job. And then in university, I started working and I realized how fulfilling it was. And I think it sucks that so many people only understand how privileged they are once that privilege is taken away. But I'm really grateful for that experience.
And thank you for sharing that with us, because it is indeed very personal. I want to go back to the trend now. And Darren, I want to share with you one clip we found online with the inconsistencies of this trend. Take a look.
people of this app who are doing the celebrity block trend where we're just straight up blocking these out of touch with reality celebrities, I commend you. Because listen, if there's anything that I'm good at, it's being a professional hater. But what about the ding-dongs in Washington who pass bills in the middle of the night that only benefit their geriatric dinosaur wallets? Could we not all get together and do something even crazier? Like, I don't know, maybe refuse to pay taxes, or maybe we pick a month where nobody spends a single dollar on a mega corporation who rakes in billions of dollars a year, but their own employees can't even afford rent.
Darren, can I get your take on whether this trend is really just about venting about the injustices in the world and exchanging knowledge, but doing nothing about it necessarily? Or do you see this as something more?
I think inevitably there's going to be stages to class consciousness. I think one of those initial stages is awareness. I wouldn't want to look down on the particular stage that anybody might be at, but blocking celebrities might be somebody's first stage of awareness. But we have to get to the point where, like the person in the video said, you have to cause some kind of disruption, whether that be financially or whether it be some other kind of systemic disruption. But the one thing we have to understand is that the only way you bring about systemic change is you have to cause some kind of disruption to the maintenance of the system. If it's just making a noise, it's fine, and it might annoy people and it's uncomfortable, but if people can still go to the same stores and still participate in the same system in the same way, nothing is going to change. And I think that we need to keep that in mind as we go through these various stages of class consciousness.
Class consciousness, that is something else that's been talked a lot online. And again, we've been talking about the fact that loads of people are waking up to this because of inequality. And Madison, on how people are actually really struggling, I wanted you to look at this short clip we found on social media, and then I'll ask you a question about it.
As someone who formerly worked as a crisis social worker, meaning I went to de-escalate people who were about to themselves and or others, it was 3 months. I quit after 3 months. But anyway, I know we were getting back to back calls. I was doing that job in 2021. So now that the economy is the crisis teams just waiting outside of people's houses just in case, because you're about to make houselessness illegal. The minimum wage don't make no sense. Nobody can get a job. When you ask people, do you feel like harming yourself and or others? I think that most people, if they were being honest, they would say yes.
We often think of America as this powerful, very rich country, but 11% of the population are actually living under the poverty line. That's 36 million people. Would you say, Madison, that their frustration or even anger is understandable today?
Yes, I absolutely think that it's understandable. And I agree with what one of the other commenters was saying before, is that there are different stages to activism, and that is an important first step. I think that what is so important is to be able to reach people with the information that they need to be able to channel their anger, because again, I think anger is a very natural and necessary reaction to what we're seeing happening right now all across the world. But anger that doesn't have a channel, I think, tends to turn into hatred or vindictiveness against whoever is nearby that you perceive as lesser than you. And so I think that that explains at least a part of what we're seeing happening in the United States right now, of a lot of misdirected anger that is kind of hindering kind of class consciousness and unity.
Would you say that that has to do with the political scene?
Yes, I do think it does.
I want to ask each one of you now for a look towards the possibilities in the future for this trend, because obviously this is a debate, is a big conversation happening online, but it is, even if it's not translating into any kind of action for now, as you all said, it is becoming knowledge, right? More and more people are growing aware of the numbers and just how much wealth there is, and the concentration of it, and how unfair perhaps that is. Albina, where do you see this trend going? You said yourself that the system has failed the majority. So where to from here?
I think for me personally, the biggest problem right now is not even businessmen, as many people think. but it's the lawmakers. Because even if you look at the insider trading policies prior to 2012, in Congress, you didn't even get punished for insider trading. So the rules which would apply to CEOs wouldn't apply to lawmakers. And I think this is so dangerous. And now that they have changed it, but we know that did they really? Because you still see it happening all the time. And the regulations are very shaky. So I think the problem is not just with billionaires. The problem is with the system, because we're seeing that people are making so much money during COVID, during housing crisis, and we know how they're making it. So you can't just change the behavior of one person, because even when we're talking about can billionaires be ethical, I think they can't. But I also think it's very hard to be an ethical person in general, and it's also easy to have high morals when they're not tested.
John, your take on whether there can be, I don't know, any sort of reform going forward that will reshape our economic model, and whether social media could actually help.
I think social media has certainly, for the four of us here, certainly helped to raise awareness. And I definitely think we're at that stage now of raising awareness, people becoming more conscious of these things going on. And, you know, if that's where we are for the next 50 years, at least we will have moved the needle forward in some way, shape, or form. I certainly hope other things happen a lot faster, whether that's legislatively around the world, because these problems are not unique to the places we're dialing in from. They're happening globally. I think as well, really figuring out how to change people's mindsets away from the idolization of this wealth. I think in the next 10 years, we're supposed to have the first trillionaire, and I'm pretty sure we know who that's going to be. It's going to be Elon Musk, and he has such a fandom around him. So to change that away from the people that are using wealth in the wrong ways to those that are using it a bit more ethically. And for anybody listening and watching, certainly anyone that signed on to the giving pledge, billionaires that have pledged to give away a majority of their wealth by the time they die, is a good place to start. We should be focusing more on promoting those sorts of billionaires, ethical or not, versus the ones that really we know are not doing the best things for society.
Darren, when we spoke to you before the show, you mentioned the word apathy. Are we faced with an unsurmountable amount of challenges that will just see us talking about this anger but not really doing anything about it?
I think there's a class of people that exist in society, and we refer to them as the middle class. And they essentially create this buffer that we see as not being as privileged as the ultra wealthy, but not being as destitute as the working class. And I think it essentially has this hero status in society, this noble status, rather than another at-risk class who is closer to the working class than the billionaires. And so I think as long as we idolize that status, rather than trying to eliminate class status entirely, people are just going to exist in that middle class or aspire to that middle class.
Now, Madison, a final question to you. Your views on the future of this anger we've been talking about that has gotten us talking about eating the rich. Do you agree that we should be holding the powerful to account?
Yes, I absolutely do. I think that it has become very difficult for people to know how to direct that anger because we live in such a complicated late stage capitalist society. And I think it is often very tempting for people to think there is one easy answer. Why is nobody doing it? And I think that that point of view is actually very counterproductive because it just fuels more anger without, giving people, excuse me, any direction to put that in. Because it is such a nuanced topic. Again, I think somebody brought up the coupling of the regulatory sector and finance. And I think until we decouple those, there's going to be very little incentive for our regulatory system to change in a productive way. But again, that is just one, I think, small element of the problem. And I think that it is going to take probably some kind of leader or figurehead that people trust enough to feel they can unite behind and take direction from. Because I think everybody's really looking right now for what can I do about the state of the world. And it is very difficult to turn individual action into impactful change without some kind of coordinated effort. I think somebody else or I think you played a clip earlier where people were discussing things like a general strike, that kind of thing. But again, I think that takes uniting behind some kind of target goal or leader or idea. And I think we are currently lacking that right now.
Well, we could potentially see something like that emerge on social media. At least there is a channel and a space for communication with that. But for now, we're out of time, and that's where we're going to have to leave today's conversation. Madison, Albina, John, and Darren, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being part of the stream today. And thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget to stay in touch with us online. You can use the hashtag or the handle AJStream, and we'll look into your questions and suggestions. Take care, and I'll see you soon.